This podcast is supported by Siemens, your partner for industrial-grade AI.
Hi there, welcome to a new episode of the Industrial AI podcast. My name is Peter Seberg, I'm your host, and today I'm going to be talking to, again, Armin Hadzalic. He is Senior Software Developer with Siemens. Yes, some of you will say, Siemens? Isn't Siemens your podcast partner? Yes. Siemens is our podcast partner. We do have a Chinese wall between content and partnering. That means that if we find good content, in this case through Armin, and I'm sure Armin, by the way, is going to be answering the question that is our topic today, if MCP will succeed, and I'm sure he will be adding value, then that's what we'll be doing. Good morning, Armin.
Hello, good morning, Peter. Thank you for having me in your episode again.
You're very, very welcome. What do you think of introduction? No pressure, right?
No pressure. Yes.
No pressure. Yeah, I'm sure you'll provide very good information as long as I provide the right questions to you for our listeners. So, yes, please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, hi, I'm Armin Hadzalic. I'm 15 years old, working for Siemens almost since 14 years now. And I work on scaling AI solutions and making agents available across Siemens so that developers and teams can quickly build proof of concepts. We have a lot of use cases which wants to be realized with new AI concepts. And I flipped the sides kind of. Before I spent many years working in OT, and now I want to deepen my knowledge on the cloud side. And I think the IT is also the new human resources, if you want to say, but in as a digital workforce in that meaning. And that's why I changed the sites to see what I can do here and where I can help Siemens and learn new things.
That's great. Wasn't aware of that. OT, IT, it has been a topic, as long as I've been, in the industrial automation space, 10 years before I started together with Robert, the podcast, I guess. And you still see that topic like every day these days, right? And I do believe I wasn't coming to the specific topic of OT, IT, but when, for example, we talk about OPC UA later, maybe other technologies, maybe in between, we'll talk about exactly that topic. Armin, were you on the show before? Remember when that was?
Yes, that was it 7 or 8 months ago at the beginning of the year?
Exactly, in January, yeah, right.
Quite a lot of things happened since then. I can remember MCP. I don't know that was it a topic at all? I don't think so.
Don't think so. No, we introduced agents, right?
Yes, agents and
agents unleashed.
Yes, exactly. And
right.
And in the meantime, A2A happened. We got GPT-4. We get better reasoning models, thinking models. Everybody's talking now about large language models, but also about small language models. And I think I can remember that we predicted agent stores. But this was something where we said, okay, that might come next year. And in the meantime, all over the place, there are agent stores already. You have a market store from Google, Agent Space and AWS, the marketplace, and agent stores from Microsoft. So a lot of happened during these 7 or 8 months.
AP2 I saw yesterday, only 2 days ago, Agent Payments Protocol. So we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
So, dear listener, maybe you consider this as the continuing story of agents and whatever they're going to be doing to you, to us, to the world, at least to the world of industrial automation. So, right, you're going to be answering throughout basically the question if MCP will succeed and what role it will be or it will not be providing to us. Please do not start with giving us a short yes or no answer. We'll find out your position throughout the course of the interview. But why don't you tell us at the very beginning again and for those people that maybe are not yet aware, for those listeners, what is MCP? What does it stand for?
So MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. That is a protocol which was provided by Anthropic back then, last year. I guess it was around November. And in one line, you can say that's an open standard for connecting AI systems to the rest of the world. So why was that needed at all? So LLMs were largely isolated. So in data silos, it is more or less text-based. And it has the data which it was trained on, right? And MCP gives the LLM kind of, hands and arms to run servers and to connect to external data sources, for example, to get the latest data or the internet connection and file system. And so you can imagine everything you want. So basically, LLM is getting hands and can now not only give you answers based on the trained data, but also on the current data you are providing with MCP. And MCP itself as a protocol, there are a bunch of layers there. Can tell you something like it has 3 primitives. So this is tools, resources, and prompt templates. On the one side, tools, of course, that is the main part. Everybody is working mainly with that primitive. That means you are providing access to databases, for example. That is a tool which can invoke then various databases. You have resources, a layer of resources where you can interchange files, data, and content. And you have also kind of prompt templates. This is basically some kind of placeholder, which ensures that you always get same output and structure while you are talking with your MCP servers. And this is a kind of basic inside the MCP. Of course, there were changes. I think in the summer, in June, there was a big update regarding authorization and authorization. And it is evolving, but it is going to be, or it is already, to be honest, a standard, de facto standard in the AI world. And it solves really the N by M integration problem, which we had before MCP. So it means, you have an LLM, you want to connect to any tool, you have to implement this. And then so on and so forth, you end up with problems when you want to scale. And this is where MCP comes into play and solves a big problem.
Right, in a standard way. Interesting, you refer to this, what you call it, M2N, right?
N by M integration problem, or N times M, yes.
Right, so you are one client, you want to connect to whatever, 25 data points, and the person sitting next to you, maybe he's your colleague or doesn't matter, has the same interest and also wants to connect to these 25 data points, right? Is that the M2N or?
Yes, basically, if you want to go outside into the world, you need to do some implementation. So you're coding that the LLM understands your endpoint. And of course, you have then different endpoints, and that's fine. And then all of a sudden, you change the LLM, for example, and you have to do the same implementation again and again. And that is a problem when it comes to scaling. And it's called, I guess it's called N by M integration problem. And MCP solves that.
I'm going to come to that in more detail later on, because I'm going to ask you very specifically what, if at all, MCP will do to other protocols, architectures, and specifically I'm interested in the OPC UA, and we'll keep that for later on. But the reason I just mentioned it here is because when I introduced the OPC UA, when was that? Probably 15 to 20 years ago to the world, together with my colleagues, with Stefan, with Uwe, many other people. I started exactly from this beginning point of the M2N, showing all the arrows, and instead of all the arrows, having all these different solutions from a bunch of starting points to all these endpoints. At that time was OPC UA, but we'll talk about that later if there's an overlap or if at all. Maybe you can give us a use case example, maybe comparing, this use case, how was it done, whatever, a year ago before MCP existed, and how is it done today with MCP, and maybe also including then how was it done, maybe, I don't know if that's an in-between point, how was it done before LLMs and how is it done today with LLMs, if that applies.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can think of, let's take this example here. You have anomalies on your machine. So somehow you've been reported that the machine makes problems. And typically an engineer before LLM and before MCP would have to cross-check OPC UA data from I don't know, from system, from log files. And after figuring out what the problem is, the engineer might contact the RP system to check if there are spare parts, and then maybe at the end also creating a maintenance ticket at the end. So a bunch of activities had to be done, and the engineer needed to know a lot of skills. So for example, OPC UA, RP system reading and working with that, and also writing tickets. And now with MCP and agent approach, this is all done in the background, and the engineer is just notified about the plan. So exactly that plan that I described in the beginning is executed, shown to the engineer, and the engineer then decides to go with that approach or not. So this is, I would say, one use case. And in the background, of course, you have MCP as the execution part of the requests of an LLM. Yeah. So the LLM does the planning. It knows exactly the workflow I described right now. So if there is an anomaly, then take a look into the data. And where is the data? The data is accessible via MCP. So there's ideally an MCP connector for the OPC UA interface. And then it goes alongside with the other workflow I described. And yeah, basically, this is now the new world. It's getting much faster, and the engineer is freed to do more creative tasks, so to say.
Yeah, and it maybe changes what the engineer must still do, or what another person without the base engineering capabilities, but still with an interest in certain questions, where before then, so a year or two ago, he or she had to go to the engineer, and the engineer would do the work. But through the large language model, I can assume that the person can ask questions directly through the LLM, and then will go as you just explained. That may change for that reason as well?
Yeah, I mean, last year it was already like that. So you had ChatGPT or AI assistants where you could ask, right? So you got an answer, and then you had to, I don't know, copy paste the answer into another system, or extract some other parts to fulfill the whole picture here now, right? And now you have the execution already done by these AI systems also. So in addition, and that makes it, of course, for a human much more convenient and consistent so to work with such a system, right? So this is something where we benefit from. You don't have to use 5 apps or do these copy paste actions like last year to solve a task you can remember, and you stay in one interface. So maybe I guess you mentioned last time the personal assistant, Peter, that goes into that direction, having one interface, doing everything for you, and you don't care about what happens in the background. I mean, it's the same for browsers. You don't know what happens if you click on a link, right? So in the beginning, it was very interesting what is happening in the background, but we don't register what happens on server side. So, and that's the same for MCP, I guess.
That's a good point. Last time I talked with Robert in our news part, I called it the it because I wasn't sure what it was going to be. I mean, if we're going to be calling it AI or the large language model, which I still think it is. I mean, so the medium I believe that we humans will continue to go through doesn't matter if it's audio or if it's text or whatever it's going to be. But I still believe that the first receiving point of what the human wants is going to be this large language model, right? And then, as you're explaining, the large language model will decide what to do. It will then maybe typically be going more often through MCP. And maybe we're moving into the question that I had kind of prepared for next, is like, what is MCP kind of useful for? So MCP is MCP, or we're going to maybe come to that later here, is MCP then a protocol for humans, for engineers, or is it really to be seen as a, providing LLMs, which sit then before the human with a better way to work with agents or for agents to more easily get information out of this world in the end for the human that wants something?
Yeah, interesting question. I would say it is in the first hand, it's something for the LLMs. So we want to connect AI systems with the outside world. So this is the core of the whole MCP. For the humans, in best case, you will not even register that there's an MCP in the background. So if MCP really succeeds and is a really successful story, then the end user will not even know about that. So to be honest, nobody, as I said, nobody takes care about what happens in the background when you press a link in your browser, right? So I would say for the humans, it is a system which makes, working with AI systems more convenient, of course. But in the first place, it's really important for the LLMs to have this connection to the outside world. That is the main purpose, I would say. And of course, alongside with that, the agents, which are also working with LLMs, but not only, they're also benefiting from MCP. Because if you have something like an standard, then that speeds up agent systems to become more popular, to get better adoption. So you can say for LLMs and for agents, it's more important than for the humans. That is my perspective on that.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to give you a very specific final question later on, which is maybe more closely linked to humans. We'll see. I saw you did this great piece, and we'll link to that as well for listeners that want to have a little bit more background on exactly this very topic. Before we move on, you did that together with Microsoft BMW with Wired Consulting. And without going into further detail, that's where you then also introduce the emerging communication standards for the agents. So maybe you mentioned them quickly at the beginning, but maybe you can talk to them. So those that are around before or after MCP.
Yeah, we had an article on Wired.com exactly, and it was about living factories driven by agents or autonomous systems, which are at the end optimizing industrial operations. So, and I think it is something which is in the future, of course, but it is not in the far future. So when we talked about, I don't know, in the 90s, it was far away. But the scenario described there, I think this is something which can be realized or which will be, standard in 2030. Just imagine only the 8 months we had from the last episode to this one, what happens. And that makes me really confident that, this living factory will be reality.
Quickly, as you mentioned it, living factory, the living standing for, what does it represent?
It's seamless integration of all systems there. That's why we use the living term here, because it has kind of, feeling like this is an organism. It reacts not only inside the plant, but also to the outside world. Imagine just there's a new TikTok trend, whatever, and that information is fed to the plant. And all of a sudden, all systems, are then changing the products and producing exactly that new need in the internet or this new hype. That's why we call that living.
Okay. Yeah, because at the same time, I saw actually, and I think your article, does it start with is it a BMW production or what production is it? Does it say north of Munich even, or is that correct?
It's just there's not dedicated. It's a future scenario.
Yeah, I know. In the meantime, I did see though an article by, I'm not sure, that's not important where, but it's the VP for production, BMW. You may know him, and he was already talking about how they are. I think in this case it is BMW. Most of people know from Munich, a factory north of Munich, in which for specific subsections of the production, they already have what typically we call the lights out factories, right? So where it's dark. And I think he says, when you put the lights on, when for maintenance, and maybe these are a version of what you call the living factories, but the living then for the systems, the completely integrated system.
Yeah, and they don't need light. Not for all processes, but
Very good. So that's where you introduce then the emerging communication standards. MCP is one of them. There's 2 or 3 other ones. You want to share them with us and what they specifically do?
Yeah, I wrote also an article about that. So MCP and of course A2A, we come later maybe to A2A also, but they are not that popular as MCP and A2A is. There's, for example, this agent communication protocol, ACP. This is something like it enriches interaction and provides streams for other agents, so to say, and you have this agent network protocol, ANP, also not that famous so far because it has some interference also with A2A, and that basically describes the agent markets. So when A2A is something like the enterprise solution, having agents interchangeable inside factories and enterprises, then ANP describes a little bit agent markets and really the high level marketplaces, stuff like that. But as I said, it is not yet popular like MCP and A2A. And it may change also in future. Maybe ANP or parts of ANP protocol will be part of A2A. That might happen. And you mentioned already also the AP2 from Google.
Yeah, I saw that. I only saw it 2 days ago. Or is that it's really new, right?
And I can remember we didn't talk about the protocol, but we mentioned at least that agents will become a wallet last time, I guess.
Right, there you go.
So some more predictions which were fulfilled.
I quickly read it this morning, and it said something like it's going to make sure that your agent will not be, buying whatever 100 shares for you just because it thinks you need 100 new shares or whatever. I don't know the further details, but so that is in addition to the MCP then, and maybe there's going to be other ones that we'll see, or that when we'll talk the next time in a year, maybe we will then talk about the ones that have been added. Now, on LinkedIn, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a couple of articles voting against MCP for several reasons. Do you recall what the reasoning has been of the people expecting MCP to fail?
Yeah, the main reason I read all over the articles was that once you own an interface, that means that you're owning the customer. And a lot of people, if you so MCP puts kind of an agent in the middle, and service providers lose direct contact and risk become backend utilities, something like that. So that was mentioned a lot. And to be honest, I was a little bit confused about that. It made sense to me in some regards. And I was a little bit, what does it mean? Is that true? And I was thinking about that. And of course, platforms always want to protect their positions. That's also true. And that might be also a reason why everybody was talking about that MCP will fail, because the platforms will not allow you, to get their customers to your site. But I was thinking a little bit deeper, and I came at least to a different meaning of the whole thing. And I think these were the two main reasons why MCP will fail. So the interface, that the platforms will not allow that.
Right. So eventually you came to another conclusion, which is what you're going to be sharing with us right now. So why then will MCP not fail? And sure, I mean, you're going to be sharing your opinion. And as I said, there were a couple of folks saying, and maybe you are now going to convince them if they listen to this interview, why MCP will not fail. So tell us, why, from your perspective, will MCP succeed? And maybe you can give us an overview, and then we'll go into a couple of topics in more detail later on.
Now let's take the technical side first, because infrastructure, that was mentioned also a lot, that being the reason for getting MCP failing. I think infrastructure is king. I mean, open protocols like TCP/IP, they show huge values in backend standards. Just think about Visa, for example. Visa works on TCP/IP at the very end, and it is you can say de facto a global standard finance for the finance world. And this is an example for how you can use infrastructure to build something which is really, really important and has a huge value. Just think also about Bluetooth. or the Wi-Fi. I mean, there are a lot of devices out there. Okay, there are some which are not so good and they will not succeed, of course, but the basis of all this is an open protocol or a standard. And that's why I think that if you have open protocols, that will help you. And this is one of my biggest arguments here.
Sure, I understand that one. Yeah, coming back to the interview I did before on a completely different topic, Jens Stapelfeld, AMD, and his reasoning for why AMD would be playing a role. That was before NVIDIA was putting money into Intel, but completely independent. His reasoning is for why AMD will be playing a big role within the GPU market is also openness. So that is the reasoning, open protocol that you're giving for why MCP will succeed is a similar one. Okay, understood that one.
Yeah, and one big pro reason is also that I didn't understand that. I mean, big tech is already on board, so I don't know what that means that MCP will fail when Google uses this, Anthropic, Microsoft. AWS is, I think it's in the steering committee of the whole protocol side, and they are pushing MCP and A2A. So the momentum is strong across competitors, I would say. And an additional reason why that will succeed is that enterprises and factories and Siemens and all vendors you can imagine, they want interoperability. An industry. Open standards like OPC UA or MQTT, they won because companies prefer integration over vendor lock-in. And that's also a big pro argument from my perspective. And taking all these points then together, I came then to the conclusion that there are more pros than cons against MCP. And I think, I'm pretty sure that MCP will become a standard, and it is already used in a lot of applications, and that will be a huge success story.
Yeah, you didn't mention OpenAI, which only came aboard last couple of weeks, maybe even before many of the folks, maybe off and including of you listeners, perfectly fine. This is not a law. This is a different perspective, and we're listening to the perspective of Armin. They only came aboard a couple of weeks ago, I believe, right?
Yeah. That was also a big lifting for MCP, of course.
But and a very strong signal, I guess. I mean, it feels like they have been trying to do their thing outside of MCP, because there is, of course, while it is open, is it a certain goodness to the company that started it, in this case Anthropic? So does it provide, at least in the background, maybe some branding value? I don't know. I mean, as long as it's open, as you say, AWS is in the steering committee, and so all the people who want to and have people can send people there. That's typically how it works, right? But maybe there's a little bit of goodness, oh, look at them. Anthropic came with this idea. They brought it and they made it an open protocol proposal.
Yeah. Yeah, it could have been also a little bit different, that Google came up with let's say, similar idea, and then there would be a war between those two concepts. But at the end,
as we've seen many, many, many times in the past, I think. Well, but you have to be a little bit older. I think even before my time, I think there was a video recorder standard war. That's like many, many, many years ago.
Yes, beta and VHS.
You know that.
Yeah, I know that. I know that.
I wasn't so specifically aware of it. I believe people say that not necessarily the best, that the highest technically quality version one, but for whatever reason, maybe another one. Okay, very good. Now you already mentioned OPC UA as well as an example. So I think another reason that you gave in your article, you said MCP brings discovery, security, interoperability. Reading those words again brought me, having been strongly involved also in, telling the world about OPC UA. They are typically or the very typical features, so to say. It's an interoperability architecture. OPC Foundation doesn't like to call OPC UA a protocol, but rather an architecture with included security discovery. But I'm going to start the question more broader. Are there other, and OPC UA would just be one example that I would appreciate your feedback on. Are there other existing industrial standards that show a certain overlap with what is now coming new to the market, MCP? Or would you say, no, the ones that I'm thinking about, OPC UA, I don't know, communication protocols, they will continue to do their job as they're doing, and MCP will cooperate with them or not, or sit next to them?
You mentioned already OPC UA. I would also mention MQTT, for example. But I think MCP is very special in this regards. It is complementary to these protocols. Think of OPC UA and MQTT as an example for industrial, protocols. These are data highways, so they're connecting devices. Back then, there was a big need to standardize how you connect to devices to extract, bit information, analog signals, and all the data fields, right? There was a high need to standardize this. And be it OPC UA for, as a Swiss Army knife, with high security standards and also machine-to-machine communication, or let it be MQTT for, publish, subscribe, and stories and like that. These are all protocols which provide data from the field. But this data is not prepared to be consumed by AI. And this is where MCP comes into play. So it complements kind of the existing data highways, and MCP plays kind of, navigation system, as a navigation system, so to speak, how to get to this through this data and to prepare this for the AI systems above. So that's why I don't think MCP is a threat to these protocols. Not at all. I think it enhances kind of and makes OPC UA fit for the new AI era. That is my thinking here in this regards.
Okay, let's think one step further. And this is really supposed to be just as an example, and only because I know a little bit about OPC UA. And very good that you put MQTT there as well. There's huge discussions everywhere on these two. That is not what this is about. I'm going to ask you one more specific question just for my understanding. And because I know a little bit about OPC UA, I ask you on the example of OPC UA, because what we typically have there is a client, and the client, right, sits typically close to the human, let's say to the engineer that we talked about, right? And on top of that will be whatever system that wants to know something. And there is the other overlap with what you said, discovery. So it will discover that, in my world of fabrication, close or far away, there is a specific OPC UA service capable of doing certain things. And they provide me the information, typically, I believe that is very specific for OPC UA, within an information model. Now, there's a lot of discussion all the time about graphs, networks, and it's like very much graph kind of provider of information, such a hierarchical information model, right? So it's almost like, would that mean that if I have in my system, these OPC UA servers, I have clients, if MCP is going to become introduced and I say, okay, I'm going to look into that, what MCP can do for me, how does MCP work? Does it work similarly with like a client server? And does it mean that I am now going to need like an OPC UA MCP server? Or how will those two connect, as an example?
Yeah, exactly. That is also based on this client-server architecture. You're absolutely right. So typically, you would need to get in contact with OPC UA data. You need an MCP server for this. And I can also link to a playbook where you can try this out to write an OPC UA MCP server. And from that moment on, the MCP server knows exactly where the OPC UA endpoint is, what the data means inside, whether it be, prepared as knowledge graphs, whatever. That doesn't matter. It's all up to the MCP server, of course. The MCP server has now the capabilities, and your AI agent system now can discover what tools are in this MCP server. So there's a client then talking to the MCP server. The MCP server is offering then the tools it has inside, and then the agent can decide, okay, exactly that is what I need, and please invoke this data field here and give me the information.
Okay, you will share that link with us, so we'll make it available to our listeners as well. Very good. Right, and again, that was only an example, and I assume something similar would be necessary or would be possible with MQTT and with any other protocol architecture that is important in our industrial world.
Exactly, absolutely. And I think that also device builders will, ship MCP servers for their devices in the future. This is an absolute must. So devices needs to be prepared for the new AI era, and it needs then MCP servers, which can be downloaded ideally from the website then of the device builder.
Now, what changes will MCP, as driven by the LLMs, agents, as we discussed, what kind of changes will they bring to the world? To the world, I mean, it's specifically of humans. So what can you suggest maybe to our listeners? So our listeners, they are decision makers of industrial AI. They are PLC programmers. They work on the shop floor. Maybe they are MES managers. Maybe they operate machines. Maybe they do quality control. Well, you know, at least, or better probably than I, because you're very close to it. What would you suggest, and what can you, because they will be thinking now, okay, what does that mean to my job? Positive, negative sense. What is going to change to each of these types of people listening to us?
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of areas. I mean, PLC programmer, and let's take an example on the PLC programmer. What I would do as a PLC programmer, I would definitely try setting up an OPC UA MCP server, just to get hands dirty, read data from a node ID, whatever, and see if that comes to your, cloud or whatever your environment you have. That is something I would start with. And I would really stop, this, don't think AI is a toy. So often I heard, I've worked 20 years like this and I don't need that new stuff. I heard this a lot, but AI is not a toy. The sooner you stop thinking about that, the better for you. And I mean, we could also talk about the technician or the MES operator, but at the end, the overall, or the bottom line is start early. I would say be open-minded, share also the data, also your experience with these systems, and don't do this silo thinking, And if you do so, then I think AI and MCP or any protocol which will come in the future, coming from a threat to something which is an advantage for you. This is my thinking here, or my suggestion for all people involved in that area. It's not a threat. Just use it and work with that, and then it's not a threat.
It may become a threat if you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that fair? Is that fair to say? If you say, I've been doing this for 20 years, and that's no protocol, no AI, no large language model, no agents is going to be taking over what I can do, then possibly I would agree with you. It may become a threat to you because other people with the same experience or less experience.
Absolutely. And I heard also a lot of assumptions that's a hype, We don't. Let's wait and see, something like that. And this is something you have to also stop. Stop this, and the sooner the better.
Very good. I would have almost loved to finish with this suggestion by you, but I found one more topic, and I did already suggest it to you in the course of our discussion, which is something that just came. Maybe you saw it as well. Just came up a day or two ago. During my preparation for the interview, I came across a post by Dylan Dufresne, which I don't know personally, but his quote was like, "Dashboards are dead. Long live MCP." Now, if so, that would just be like an example of an extension almost of the question I asked before, right? I said PLC programmers, MES managers, there's people building dashboards. There's people doing usability, which is what this is really all about. Now, so he says, why would I need a speedometer when I can simply ask my MCP-enabled agent, hey, what speed am I currently traveling at? I think there was a very funny video, I wasn't sure if that was AI generated, where a person sits in a car and asks through MCP agent, LLM agent, MCP, hey agent, are my headlights on? The agent says, oh no, they're off, I believe. And by the way, and then when I came there, I thought, well, let's not forget that we have since almost 5 years this famous question from our personal, dare I say, godfather AI supporter, Sepp Hochreiter. We started, that was 6 years ago. And he already said at that time, machine, he was talking to a machine, tell me, how are you doing? How is your oil pressure, right? So it's 5, 6. That's exactly the same. Now, what is new here, and that's the question I'm going to ask you for your perspective, is this connection to dashboards or that long live MCP? Is it because of MCP that this interaction from the engineer and, as we already discussed, not only the engineer, the person on the shop floor, wants to know something, typically goes to a screen, there's maybe an MES, and I can see something or click on it or ask something. Is this going to change? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely. I mean, think about why we had dashboards at all. I mean, it's because the huge amount of use cases and failures which can happen, and so you wanted to have everything in one place as a human to have an overview, regardless if you need the data or not, right? And that will not be the case in the future anymore. Dashboards will exist; they will not disappear completely, because you always have this human in the loop, and the human, of course, needs an overview, and in the best way it is visualized, of course, and shown to a human, so that the human can decide whether the action done by an agent was okay or not. So I think dashboards will not disappear, but they will become much more lightweight, kind of. So only the data is presented which you are interested in. You mentioned it already. You are asking, and then based on your question, a dashboard is generated, for example. Then that makes then the decision taking by an agent easier for a human to understand. And that's why I think dashboards will stay, but they will look different.
Yeah. What is very interesting that you bring us back to the very beginning of when did we start to get dashboards, which I don't know if that's 25 or 40 or 50 years ago within our industrial environment, and the same in cars. I don't know when they came in, 30 years ago, or when was the first car? There was no dashboard, but at some point in time,
I was not alive.
No, right? But it's a very good point of why did we start getting dashboards, because in our production environment so many things were happening, and because of OEE and striving towards 100%, we're getting less and less problems, but we still have enough. Typically that's where we have a certain percentage points of 60, 70, 80, 90, whatever it is, and not 100. But it's a very good point. At the same time, though, when we talk to another concept, autonomous driving, we see the concept today in the countries, in the cities where, including at this time, the event here in Munich, there were many opportunities driving autonomously. And then we see the concepts, the new car concepts without a steering wheel. That's very similar or not? Will it depend on, is there going to be a transition period where we're going to have both? So I can be asking whoever, whatever, my machine, stay with Sepp Hochreiter machine, how are you doing? And only if, as you say, I want to check, is that really true, what it's telling me? Can I check exactly. Whatever? And then maybe 5 years later, 10 years later, we say, okay, now our complete system of large language models, agents, through MCP and whatever is going to be coming is now so good that we don't need them anymore. Can you imagine that?
You mentioned something really true here. So it will become really like this. So in the beginning, we wanted to have the control. on our side. So we wanted to control everything. And the more we got sure that the system reacts exactly in that way we want it, in that moment we don't need the controlling perspective here. And it might change really in the future. I said dashboards will remain, but sooner or later they maybe also disappear. Absolutely right. Just talking to an interface, however that looks like, but with much less information than before. So it will change. You're absolutely right. It will change.
Okay, Armin, thank you very much. This was great. This was the continued story around agents and protocols. Today was specifically Armin answering the question, or he was telling us that, according to him, MCP will succeed. And in the end, he was telling you, dear listener, to not be afraid, to jump in. If you haven't yet, jump in, and he will share a specific link where you can start building around MCP. And that's only one little piece, of course, of the large language models, of the agents, all the good things that we talk about every week. And maybe we can agree, Armin, that we're going to be doing this at least once a year. So the next time,
yeah, I would like to. Definitely.
Next time we'll talk about.
See what prediction will come true next time.
We don't know what we're going to be talking about. Armin, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Peter, for having me. Yeah.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Have a nice day. Bye.